Hello and welcome to another episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, where I interview your content creator, Chris Noble. Chris, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Brandon. It's really awesome to be here. I'm excited to dive into today's topics.
So, last episode we were talking about the pyramids and some of the construction there, and we promised our viewers and listeners that we were going to keep it grounded, and we started to get into stargates, and we started getting extra
That was my
planetary.
fault. I take responsibility for everyone listening.
It's fair. It's fair. It is something. I mean, why do we all know about portals? Why do we know all about that stuff? It's in our inherited collective memory. But something that really interests me are these giant colossus statues. And I was asking Chris, he was in Egypt and they were studying these things, and the remarkable similarity between these statues is just incredible, to the point where it almost looked like they had been 3D printed. So what I would like to do is carry on with that thought, because it's very interesting to me, and start talking about some of the technologies that they had. So first of all, Chris, where we left off, ancient tech, we're starting to get into this amazing era now of 3D printing, and I'm seeing AI generated art and AI generated stories, and it's truly amazing what we're being able to accomplish, and the ease of it. I wonder if we're going to see a renaissance of great architecture, rather than these kind of, very, very prison like kind of structures we see with no inspiration to them. Were the ancients able to access something? Because I'm not buying the whole copper stone rolling on logs, chicken bones, and string kind of argument here. What are your thoughts on ancient high tech?
Yeah, I mean this is exciting because there's just so much to talk about in Egypt. Excuse me. One of the meccas in the world for finding so much evidence of this. And before I get into some solid, more big examples, let's say, more obvious examples, there are micro examples and evidence throughout the entire country, and they're all scattered around different sites. So, for those of you listening, one of the things I like to do with my friends and colleagues in this area is shift your perspective when you're going to these ancient sites. And your tour guide might be talking about all these other things that the tourists in the mainstream are interested in and wanting to talk about. But if you keep your eye trained, you're going to see these little pieces of evidence, depending on the site, sometimes not, but certainly in Egypt you will. Little cut marks, little perfect zing, like straight saw cut marks that you can see in a lot of different stones, or really polished surfaces, and even curved, like perfectly curved, half a cylinder type of shape with a polished edge. And this is on granite. This is, again, what we talked about in the last episode, the Mohs scale of hardness, where granite is around a 7 or an 8, copper is around a 3, meaning copper loses. When you're trying to use a copper tool on granite, the granite wins. You can't beat the granite's harder, it's denser, therefore it will break the tool, versus the tool be effective and actually make a shape out of the granite. So these are just little tiny things you can look for as examples. But one of the really interesting studies that have been done on ancient tech, specifically in Egypt, is by Christopher Dunn. Christopher Dunn is a master engineer. His background is not at all in archaeology. He comes at all of this as an engineer, and a very accomplished one for that matter. He understands, I believe he worked a lot with even designing tools themselves to complete very specific projects, etc. His website will be in the show notes. I really highly recommend that those of you listening, watching, go check him out, because if you haven't looked into his work yet, he's really, really amazing when it comes to the tech side of things. His book, the Giza Power Plant, is also really interesting read. So one of the things that he talks about that I'm really interested in is the geometry, the perfect geometry of similar or actually identical statues found throughout Egypt. So you'll see these statues of different pharaoh, of different beings. For example, Ramses is a very popular one. So Ramses, his face is all over Egypt, certainly in Memphis and other places like that. And he's Christopher Dunn and myself as well. When I was there, I took these photographs, and I could already see, just without even needing to go in with analysis, that these are perfectly symmetrical statues, and not just one, but there's a whole series of them looking identical. So how can you do that with manual artisanship and manual craftsmanship? You can't. You can't make a perfect statue, and you can't replicate that perfect statue again and again and again and again like an assembly line. You need tools. You also need computers, and you need some sort of a factory system or some form of an assembly line that's not just slaves banging away on things. And a really cool thing too is that you can see on Christopher Dunn's website, just in his article section, and you can Google this as well, is he's taken a grid and then drawn through the grid. You can see how everything is put into ratio of the statue, and then you see, okay, this nose, when it's divided in half, you fold one side on top of the other and it looks identical, meaning one side is exactly the same as the other. Once again, this precision with the naked eye is impossible, and he's drawn these incredible circles and different geometric patterns that link, again, perfectly with the statue. Not just, oh, it's close. No, no, no. It's identical. It's perfect. The only thing that are slightly imperfect are the ruins. They're in a ruined state, so obviously they don't look as perfect anymore. But when you just look at the core, the foundation of the statue, they all check out to be absolutely symmetrical. And so that implies sophisticated technology. This is a master engineer, and there's other researchers and engineers that say the same thing when they look at this kind of stuff. And it's mind-blowing because all you're seeing is evidence of computer technology and advanced tooling and craftsmanship. The ability, you would need diamond tip tools to cut into granite with this kind of precision that we're seeing in these statues. So how on earth did they do this? 3 to 5 to 6,000 years ago, however old these statues really are. And maybe these statues aren't as old. These could be newer in Egyptian history, but they're still very anomalous in the sense that we don't know how they were built and then replicated perfectly. So this to me is one of the biggest smoking guns of ancient high technology, because we have the end product. We don't have any of the tools, and we don't have any of the any writings, even like in hieroglyphs or anything, that really talk about how these things were constructed. They're just there, but they are there. And when you kind of reverse engineer it, the only thing you're left with is this was built by high technology. What kind of technology? This is where we can start to speculate. Brandon, I know you're familiar with frequency and vibrational technologies. I mean, have you come across any of this in your research?
Well, actually, I've seen crazy videos on YouTube, even of people just doing simple experiments using different notes, or I guess frequencies. I use notes. It's just an easy way to kind of translate it, because, and no, I'm not even a musician. I'm just a silly old thespian. So um I see them levitating small things just by using sound. I've seen different chambers online with things suspended in air using sound technology, almost to the point, as far as my feeble brain can comprehend it, would be that you know there's that classic South Park where they have the brown note, and if you play that note, you poop your pants. Well, it's kind of the same thing, that almost it's like we all have a serial number as far as frequency goes, and if you hit that number, you can do incredible things with my molecular structure, almost as if every cell in my body, or if I was a block of stone, every molecule to my being would thus be vibrating in such a way that perhaps if you're not causing me to go weightless, I don't know if you could heat me up to the point where you could sculpt me. I don't know if you could use it to maybe even, I don't know, create the stone to be softer, to even work, so that maybe my copper tool could shape it. I'm not sure. That's my understanding, but like I said, I'm no expert. But if I've heard of this, then I wonder what else is out there.
I mean, you're touching on something called resonant frequency, right? So with resonant frequency, we all know this from the classic opera singer sings a specific note, and the crystal glass, wine glass, shatters, right? We've seen this example all the time in pop culture. We all know that that's resonant frequency. So what the singer is doing is they're hitting a particular note that just so happens to resonate with the molecular structure of that glass. And we have this all the time. You're listening to heavy bass music. When there's a certain note in the song that gets played, all of a sudden the back window of your car starts to vibrate. That's resonant frequency. So why couldn't the ancients have had a different style or almost a different genre or a different completely different outlook on technology? And what we can do today, they could do as well, but they would do it in different ways using, for example, something like a sound-based, frequency-based technology where you can accomplish things like acoustic levitation. Like you just mentioned, we can see this on YouTube anywhere. Go Google this, go YouTube this. It's really cool to watch. And so, it's really curious as to, is this how they move those megalithic blocks? Especially, is this how they move them from Aswan, 1,000 kilometers away, all the way up to Giza? Certainly they would use a boat on the Nile. That's easy enough to do. But how do they get them onto the boat? How do they offload them? And then how do they place them with perfect 1/100th of an inch precision, and then build this thing so perfectly? So I think it's obvious that they had advanced technology. The question is what? And for me, with my research into the ancients, and I know there's other researchers that would certainly be of the same vein of thought, is it's got something to do with sound. And this is where we're getting into forgotten technologies. And right now we're rediscovering a lot of that with sound. However, I think the ancients had a very advanced knowledge of this. And you see other examples. So, in Aswan seems to be the real place for all the top granite. And this granite also has crystal in it too. It's got quartz and other forms of crystal inside this granite. That could have been for other reasons too. What do we use crystal for? Well, we know it creates piezoelectric energy, which when you put a compression or pressure into crystal, it creates electricity. That's how a crystal watch operates. Or even when you're on a film set, the time clock that records all the time for all the audio on set, it uses a crystal to keep that time. So we know that that's a real form of technology. Why are they building with so much granite that has this crystal in it? Is it just random? I don't think so. Why in the hell would they go 1,000 kilometers away just to get this particular type of granite? It has not only a strength to it, but I think it has a function. And we could go into that later. But basically with the Aswan Quarry, what's really fascinating, and when I was there in 2019, you couldn't miss it. There are these scoop marks everywhere. And it literally looks like an oversized ice cream scoop was used to just, go in and scoop out the granite, very, very hard, dense granite, as if it was putty, as if it was ice cream, quite literally, with a hot spoon going into cold ice cream. And all we could do is speculate what on earth was creating that scoop mark. And they're all over the unfinished obelisk, which is another unbelievable, well over 1,000 ton, one piece of granite obelisk. It's cracked in the middle, so that's why they left it. They didn't finish. It's the unfinished obelisk, but it shows how they were also constructing these absolutely insane one piece of granite structures that are just baffling, and to this day would be one heck of an impressive architectural feat. So these scoop marks, what are they doing? Well, one idea is that they have this form of sound technology that can melt rock, much like you were mentioning, Brandon. Like they could actually potentially, they could have melted rock with sound and then use another device to scoop out what they needed, or to pour it in as if the granite became like a liquid concrete. And then they could pour it in and then just let it settle and go back to its original, density. So that could have been another way that they, instead of moving these stones, maybe they didn't move them, maybe they melted them down, moved them that way, and then poured them into their shape that we now see as the final shape. Can you do this with sound? Well, I think you can do anything with sound personally. If you can get into the subatomic molecules of any structure, you can manipulate it in theory, right? So there's actually a video on YouTube that you can, I believe, still find. Maybe it's not. I don't know if they've scrubbed that one yet from the database, but on YouTube, you can look for and type this in. I think it's a New Zealand man creates device that boils water with sound, or just
Yes, I've seen this. I was actually going to reference that.
Okay.
It was basically like he would plug it in. It looked like it almost looked like the head of a garden hose, but instead of that little faucet where the ones where you can do the soaker, the jet, but instead of that, it
Yeah.
was round on the end. And basically the moment it touched a glass of water, it boiled. And from what I hear, from what I remember of this story, that he passed away, um, and the patent is missing and the technology is essentially lost. As to how that happens, it's kind of that phenomena like what happens with any great inventor, any of these people who seem to create water powered cars, or devices to grab water out of the air. um Things seem to happen to you if you develop the wrong technology, which is my little screenwriter brain always loves that. I mean, I don't love the fact that humanity might be being held back in shackles from freedom of certain essential resources and clean energy, but always interesting to see those kind of stories come about.
It's a screenplay for sure. I mean, we've probably already seen it in many movies already. And the thing with that particular incident, I when I was in South Africa, Michael Tellinger's he claimed to either have known that gentleman or had some sort of connection to him because he was looking into that technology as well. And he said that this particular situation, although Brandon, I think you're absolutely right. To be honest, most of the time things get sketchy very, very quickly. All of a sudden, this person mysteriously commits suicide, or they mysteriously vanish into thin air, and their research is gone. A great example of that's Royal Raymond Rife, built this incredible microscope back in the early 1900s that could see into almost the quantum realm or into the real deep subatomic realm, and then he could find the resonant frequency of each individual virus and then vibrate it out. Everything else is unaffected. Supposedly, that's what the research was, and then a week later, he's gone, research is gone, and that's the end of that. So with this guy, it sounded like he suffered from greed, actually, in this situation where he just was wanting to make his millions or billions off of this thing, and was just he never wanted to make it public knowledge. He didn't want to make it accessible to anybody outside of his own patent, and he literally took it to the grave with him. So sometimes, it's like anything in life. It's never black or white. It's always pretty gray. It's pretty complex. And in this situation, it sounds like he was more on the side of greed, and that happens too. However, a lot of the time when these things get invented, a lot of people want to bring them to the public, and that's where accidents, quote unquote, happen.
Well,
So
it doesn't seem
yeah,
to be in the collective corporation interest to even something as simple as a device that uses sound to boil water. Tesla's idea of having, like you were saying, free energy, like accessible from the ionosphere, accessible with a transmitter anywhere in the world. How do you do a subscription service to this technology? Like, where do they make their money? So,
yeah, JP
um,
Morgan didn't like that idea. And just one last thought here is this is what I mean. Like, one of the reasons we were talking about this, I believe, in our first episode, which is why is there so much people get so into such a frenzy, and there's so much in a way censorship when it comes to just alternative history. Just people like myself, like you, and scientists and other far more qualified researchers that put out these alternative theories, and they're not doing it to be cool or edgy. They're doing it because there's evidence, because we need to explore these things, and yet they receive so much backlash. This is one of the reasons why, because when you look into the ancient world, the ancient civilizations, you find advanced technology. And this advanced technology could absolutely threaten the current paradigm of the power holds, the corporation, power schemes that are already in place with when they've got their systems really nice and neat, and they don't want anything to change on that side of things. So that's another reason why there is a lot of suppression, a lot of just oppression, and a lot of people get quite upset when you rock the boat with history, because it's not just about changing paradigms and perspective, which is also really huge, but it's also the actual information, it's the technology that comes from these places, like we're discovering right now in this conversation. There's so much that we could extrapolate and take from the ancients and bring it into our everyday lives now and make them infinitely more better, basically.
I have a question. We're talking about saws, and if you're running a saw, you need to have power. In our discussion about the pyramid, that is one of the theories of the Great Pyramid is that it may have been a power plant, Nikola Tesla style, or vice versa, I suppose, technology. So we're talking about saws. We're talking about maybe having access to computers. We're talking about, being able to transport materials of great weight and mass. In our terms, if we were to try and apply our modern perspective to this, wouldn't there be garbage? Wouldn't there be leftovers? Where are the writings? Were they all e-writings? Is there a collective cloud that is a technology based, or are we assuming that these guys were tapping into the great eclectic psychic realms that you hear whispers about, that it's almost hard to fathom us as a pineal gland suppressed society about our star child capabilities? Um, where is this evidence? Because I hear that a lot about high technologies and just other than clay pots and things like that. Where are the remnants of these tools? Where is their garbage?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it's true. There isn't a lot of evidence for the tools themselves, right? All we have is the final product, the finished product, because in my opinion, it's the only thing that's been able to last that long amount of time. And when we're looking at the more advanced technology, the really interesting thing is that's when you're looking at more advanced tech in ancient times, that shows that it's actually from a more older time period. The Egypt that we see today is an Egypt that was built on top of a much more advanced previous civilization. So where's that garbage? Long, long gone. Where are those tools? Long, long gone, either used and discarded somewhere else. Who knows? The only thing that we have are these ruins of the buildings because they were the largest and the most intensely built to withstand everything from earthquakes to solar flares to God knows what. And so that's all we really have left are these finished final products. Is there evidence in some of the hieroglyphs of advanced tooling? Yes and no. There are some interesting depictions of perhaps levitation and certain things like that. And I have a couple of videos about that on my YouTube channel for Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, where we were looking and interpreting with our Egyptologist, Mohammed Ibrahim, certain hieroglyphs that do talk about certain things like levitation, even stargates and anti-gravity, perhaps with the scarab beetle and things like that. So there's a little bit of anecdotal evidence, but there's not much. And that's what the mainstream, Egyptologists specifically and archaeologists will say. That's why there's no way we can prove that advanced tech. All we can find are the copper chisels and tools. The thing about that is that's the copper tools are the last of a line of far more ancient people. So we see them because they're the most recent. And with Egypt especially, you've got things like the Great Pyramid or the Osirion, which is a really interesting complex that was found underneath an existing temple that was already from ancient Egypt. So we're seeing that the further back you go in time, the more advanced things get. That's what's really funny, and that's why our history is so bizarre, is because it goes completely against Darwinian evolution. A lot of our other things on this planet totally go by normal evolution, but we don't. And the further you go back, the older these structures are, the more advanced they seem to be. So we've got evidence of the end result, but we don't have a lot of evidence of the tools, and that's just the honest truth. We don't have a lot of that lying around. Why? Because those were probably easier to lose, to get stolen, to be hidden from us because they're advanced technology. Who knows? You can't hide the Great Pyramid, though. You can't hide the Assyrian, for example, or it was under the sand, but we found it now. So it's just things like that where we only have fragments of this. We got to remember, we're still looking at ruins here. We've only got a very, very small fraction of this much, much larger story. So to answer your question, we really don't have too much. We have to extrapolate from what we see, but what we see is certainly advanced. And how in the heck did they do it? That's really the question that we're going to be throwing around.
So we have these ruins, which in a sense is kind of garbage. It's society's great old garbage. It's what we leave behind, right? Of course, we don't view it as garbage because it has value to our wonder and awe. Um, I've heard that a lot of these ruins that we now have been buried in the sand and have been excavated. How big do you think ancient Egypt was? What do you think maybe a population size ballpark? I know it's impossible to guess, but how much is left to be undiscovered? Are we wrapping up the age of discovery with the Egypt basin, or if that's the right term, or that grand civilization? Um, are we are we running out of sites to find, or do we seem to just keep uncovering things? And honestly, is it beyond our imagination as to what we can find?
Yeah, I mean, great questions and kind of a yes to all of them in a sense, because really with Egypt, one of the interesting things about Egypt, and the Greeks were certainly aware of this, which was they believed that Egypt was the deposit of all of the old world's knowledge. And when they say old world, they mean the pre-cataclysm, the world that existed before the Great Flood of 12,500 years ago, not just this biblical story that was fantasy. No, no, no. This is correlated with hundreds of other cultures worldwide, separated by time and geography, that all talk about the same thing: a massive flood that happened. And we have the geological records. We got the ice core samples from Greenland. We've got the impact craters, and we've also got solar flare evidence as well, and including in Egypt, which I saw, which is called vitrification, I believe, which is when rock is heated at such a high heat it turns into glass, and that either happens from a nuclear blast or from solar flares. So we know that this happened. We don't know what was going on before this happened. So why couldn't there have been a highly advanced global civilization during the last ice age? It's like the last ice age had habitable zones, and one of those zones was definitely Egypt. You could absolutely live there quite well, beautifully, and a lot more different than a desert. It was a very lush, quite full of life type of climate, very very different than the Egypt we see today. So I believe that Egypt was where the Atlanteans, or the peoples of the world that were pre-cataclysm, they put a lot of their knowledge, and almost like a time capsule, almost like a Noah's Ark kind of situation. And they used Egypt as not only a place to store a lot of their information, but then as a place to reboot civilization later on, after the waters had literally settled. And we're talking at least 1,000 or 2,000 years after the major cataclysm, because the planet was going through hell and back again. It was almost impossible to have all you could really do is survive. They have these underground cities throughout Turkey as an example of what people were also trying to do to survive. So Egypt, I think, is a collection of a lot of more, even older, more ancient deposits of knowledge and technology. So when you're seeing these places, like, for example, I think the Great Pyramid was from pre-cataclysm. It existed before the Great Cataclysm. It was a part of the old world. It was a part of perhaps this Atlantean, this Lemuria, this Mu, whatever word you want to call these people of old, very advanced people of old. These were examples of what they had already accomplished, and then they may have built new things after the cataclysm, like Gobekli Tepe, for example, or things of that nature. We don't know. So I think there's a lot of evidence to support that there is so much still under the sand of the Sahara, and what's under the sand could be from that older period of time, pre-cataclysm, where you might find more examples of the Atlantean, or the pre-Diluvian people that had all this ancient tech. And I think this is definitely a more on the conspiracy side of things, but I really think that's why there's so much suppression with people trying to dig and people trying to go deeper into the sands of the Sahara in Egypt, because I know, and I've heard from other researchers and scientists who have tried to do this, it's really difficult for them to get permission. Why? It's because I think they're scared of what they're going to find. I think it's going to upset the apple cart so much, because we're going to find this lost civilization, or at least examples of probably a whole global civilization under the sand of Egypt. And when they have done ground penetrating radar and other types of things, they always find things underneath there, or empty spaces where there could be, who knows, the Hall of Records, who knows. So yes, there is so much more to still discover in Egypt. I truly believe we're just at the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more, and I believe that that's one of the really exciting things about that. The last thing I'll say, and this is going to be a video that I'll be releasing soon, is I did get to see a secret passageway into the Great Sphinx, the back left paw of the Sphinx. When I was there with Dr. Robert Schott, we got private access and secret kind of permission, basically, by the guards to look at the back left paw of the Sphinx, and you could move one of the grates aside and it's hollow inside. And there's a pathway leading up the back of the Sphinx, and there's a pathway leading into the Sphinx, and looks like it goes down into where we don't know. This isn't public access, but here it is available. The guards know about it. I saw garbage left inside, so people are clearly hanging out inside there. I think there's a whole underground city, a labyrinth of tunnels that we have yet to explore. And once we do that, I believe that's when history will have to be rewritten.
Well, I've heard the American clairvoyant psychic Edgar Casey, and say what you will about whether you want to believe in this stuff or not. I mean, I've heard the stories. Once again, I'm just a lover of the stories, and it sparks my curiosity. But he would talk about a hall of records, uh, and several actually locations around the world, but one of them, the most notable one, being within or under the Sphinx. And just interesting that somebody who uh, primarily practiced healings, and I think that's actually what did him in, was absorbing negative energy from people's healings. But to talk about that is just, it's just weird that he would randomly say that, and then that gets echoed from different sources as well. What is,
What's really crazy, Brandon, too, on that note, is that Mark Lermer, one of the foremost Egyptologists on the planet, this guy has written a lot of those textbooks. He is the mainstream. Mark Lermer is the guy, like he's in so many of these documentaries. Him and Zahi Hawass are like the two notable Egyptologists that always discredit all the theories that we're talking about today. Dr. Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, all those people that push these new, or at least try to ask the questions and push the new theories. These are the specific real represent. These are the guys that always shoot them down. But Mark Lermer originally came from the Edgar Casey Institute and was funded by the Edgar Casey Institute to look for the lost Hall of Records in Egypt. So he even started his journey looking because of Edgar Casey. So this is even from the most conservative mainstream guy. He started his journey because of Edgar Casey. So there is definitely merit in this man's readings for sure.
that's interesting. It's just, once again, kind of going back to what you were saying about militaries and government agencies, that as much as the world of academia seems to poo-poo these high ideas, we have ideas of magic, and we have ideas of abilities, psychicness, and this kind of realm of mysticism. The Some organizations don't seem to care if it works. They're like, oh yeah, he read that, and there's evidence to support that. Let's go with it. What In closing, what is the problem with the mainstream media? Like, what is so threatening about finding old sites or higher tech from the past? Wouldn't you think we as a society would want to celebrate our ancestral greatness?
I mean, you'd think so, right? But how many times is history constantly being rewritten so that it incentivizes or it manipulates the people of the time to believe what the powers that be at the time want you to believe? It's mostly just created for what's convenient for the people in power, from what I've been able to observe over my lifetime. So I would say that, looking into the true history of humanity, it's a very big threat. Certainly, it's a big threat for the corporations, because one of the first things you're going to discover is probably free energy, 0 point energy or some other form of creating energy relatively for very inexpensive, if not for free. So that's a huge disruption to a massive, massive industry known as the energy
And I
industry.
suppose, on that note, if we were to discover free energy, then that would kind of blow out the table legs on this idea that we're in a climate crisis, and that trust us, the corporations and the elites, trust us that we know the way out of it. You don't know the way out of it. We know the way out of it, and the way out of it is through poverty and taking away your liberties and whatnot. Because if they did have access to this free energy, then unfortunately the word free is I guess the problem
Can't
with
make a
that.
profit if it's free, And there's also other dangers. There's ideologies and the idea of people coming into their true power, because a big thing you can never escape with any of these ancient cultures or civilizations is consciousness. And they understood consciousness on a level that we are only rediscovering today in still a very small degree. They understood things like quantum physics, again, in a far more advanced way than we can ever imagine today. So they knew how to use this physical human vessel to do things that you could only dream about today, and or see it in a science fiction or fantasy film. So there's that other side too, where it would empower the everyday human to become, in a way, superhuman. There's so much incredible knowledge of how to enhance your body, enhance your mind, your soul, your vibration, to be able to attain these higher levels of consciousness, that with that come things like a far more healthier life. So you won't need the pharmaceutical industry anymore. You also have a way of communicating with people wirelessly. You wouldn't even really need the internet anymore, although I'm sure we'd still use it. But it starts to take our need for all these external institutions and organizations and corporations and governments, our quote unquote need that at least we're conditioned to think we need in this day and age. It eliminates a lot of that. It looks at us as the most advanced technology that there is, the human being, the human vessel. So that's another side that I think they're quite scared for us to tap into, because then you get into all these modalities that we can do ourselves. We don't need anyone. We don't need to buy anything to get there. We are the journey. We are the path to get to these places. So you've got advanced tech, you've got advanced, in a sense, medicine practices. You've got so many things that would disrupt all these major industries from making the millions and billions of dollars that they make every year off of us, the consumer.
I suppose if our body is the ultimate tech and tapped in properly can produce so many great services to ourselves, makes sense. That might answer a lot of that garbage question as well. Where there's not a need, you're not consuming in the same way. It's hard for us to even imagine a world where there's not pop cans, chip wrappers, and everything in our plastic wrapped world being left behind. Ultimately, to our demise as it gets inside of us. We are what we consume. Microplastics are now becoming a real thing. Pollution. Yeah, definitely we are on the wrong path, and perhaps the ancients are the way to correct that path.
Yeah, I mean that's the core philosophy of Ancient Mysteries on Earth, is to extrapolate the wisdom of the past and integrate it into the present. So that's what we're all about here.
Well, that's lovely. I would love to get more into Atlantis. I think that's a hot button topic. People love buzzing out to Atlantis. So maybe that's where we can kind of start to steer our world. Because as soon as you started talking crystals, I had so many questions, but I didn't want to derail us. So why don't we end the episode here on ancient tech and the possibilities of the ancients having a greater understanding of our psychic realm as well, and I'll say thank you to our beautiful content creator Chris Noble of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay kind, stay curious, and don't forget you can become a member for only 33 cents a day, adding into lots of great more content, live streaming, and access to the community and exclusive content. So thanks so much, Chris. You want to say anything for goodbye?
Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Brandon Jameson, for the wonderful interview. I appreciate you. Appreciate everyone listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Ciao for now.